Get started, Mr. Jim Davies and Kieren McCarthy. And if you could explain what is the election and what's going on, and then we'll start with our prepared. So,
sure. Well, so there's an election, I think the 12th of September.
The voting starts on the 12th, votes at the end of September.
Yeah, so 2 weeks. And then if you're a nominate member, there's 3 candidates standing for the board, and we are 2 of them. Volker Greenman is the 3rd, and we're here to try and persuade you, number 1, to vote, which you should all do, and then number 2, to vote for us. That's right. So there's 2 components. Number 1, vote. Number 2, vote for me.
Or me. Or you.
Okay, and then what we have done heads and tails in the best practices, and then we have 4 different sections, and Mr. McCarthy will go first, and Mr. Davies will go second. The first one will be everybody will explain. It will be Kieren and Jim will give their own introductions. There will be 3 questions from my side that I have prepared already and have sent to the candidates. They'll answer them. Then there will be questions that were done on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you'll pull them up, yes. And then you guys will have the opportunity to ask the questions to the candidates.
Yeah. The broad idea is for us to give a statement and then try and get as many questions in as possible. That's the idea, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so we agreed that I'd go first. So number 1, thank you for coming. So we can talk about Nominet. I don't think we talk about Nominet enough. I know there's a lot of argument around it, but I don't think there's actually enough discussion around Nominet. And Nominet is quite important. So I think it's good, at least, that you're here. And thank you for coming and thank you for listening to us. So the reason I'm standing for the board is I see that there's currently a window of opportunity in that there was, I hope you're aware, last year there was a big EGM and a vote, and then basically the CEO and the chair and 4 board members were kicked off Nominet's board. And fundamentally those were all the people that were pushing for commercialization of Nominet. And that has been a consistent issue with Nominet, to push towards commercialization. Currently, all the people that were very much on board with commercialization were booted off because that was their position. I think that's fair to say. And then currently we're in a position where there's agreement that Nominet should be a non-profit and it should be focused on the .uk registry. The reason why I say there's a window of opportunity is that nothing has changed structurally, and there will be, and this will turn around, there will be new board members, there will be a new CEO, and so I think there's an opportunity right now, and not for very long, to change that culture to what we want the culture to be. And that's what we debate, what the culture should be. The problem is there's still issues outstanding. There's just been the fights that have happened consistently in Nominet's lifespan. And the other issue we should bear in mind is that even though there was this vote, it wasn't a huge vote. It wasn't a narrow victory. It was 53% in favour, and it was a 53% turnout. So we do need to realize it's not a done deal. It's not agreed. This is just like the worst situation where Nominet was spending a lot of money and on commercial enterprises and failing. That has been removed, and I see it as a window of opportunity and a chance to renew Nominet's mission and start again in the right way. I do think it could easily backtrack, especially if we bring up old ghosts, of which there are many, and especially if we reopen old wounds, of which there are many. So my platform I'm standing on is that the goal is to make sure this never happens again. And how do you do that? I argue that we need to build trust with the members, and we need significantly better communications so that this doesn't happen again, or if it starts going down that path, members have more power and they are much more aware of exactly what's going on, and there's greater transparency and accountability. That's my solution to it. There's 3 of us standing. One of them is here, Jim Davies. Another is Volker Graham, who's I think in Germany. Is that correct?
Yes.
And both of them have been previous board members. I'm sure that they will argue that their unique selling point is their experience. I would argue that their experience is not what we need right now. I would argue that Nominet needs to look forward, not backwards, that it's in a position to move forward right now, and that you need somebody to help Nominet move forward to build more trust. And I think we can get Nominet in a position where it is the best registry in the world. There's no reason why it can't be the best run registry in the world, and that's my goal, is to help it get there and leave these disputes firmly in the past. That's where I'm standing.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Hi. So first of all, I'd like to thank Helmets for inviting us here to speak today, but also for organising this very successful London Domain Name Summit. I'm Jim Davies, as Kieren said. I'm a former director of Nominet, but I'm also a lawyer and have commercial experience in the last 25 years in the domain name space. I've specialised in domain name law for most of that time, and a lot of the sort of landmark decisions I was involved in. So I have a lot of knowledge and experience of both the domain name space and the members, having been their lawyer, but also to some extent also on the inside of Nominet, having been a director in 2008 to 2009. The platform that I stood on in 2008, very similar to the public benefit platform that ran the successful EGM that Kieren mentioned last year, and I was an early and vociferous supporter of the public benefit campaign, both for the EGM and in the subsequent successes in last year's board elections at the AGM. While I agree with Kieren that this is a unique opportunity for Nominet, a window of opportunity, as he put it quite rightly, to change, I think it's perhaps a little optimistic to sort of try and ignore the lessons of the past if you're going to want to move forward. I don't think rug sweeping what's happened is the way forward. I think we do actually have to examine what's gone wrong and then learn from that experience, and also make a top priority the governance changes that will lock in that change, not just relying on the goodwill of the current board, because as we've seen, that can change and it can be cyclical. So looking forward, I think it's fair to say that since the EGM, which was, as Kieren said, quite close, but also quite a seismic change for Nominet, and possibly unexpectedly successful, and credit to Simon Blacker and the public benefit campaign for that. We've seen positive changes since the EGM, but we really do need to see more. There is a danger of backsliding, and now is not the time to take our foot off the accelerator pedal. Now is the time to push forward. I think that we need to review what happened with the Siglass debacle, which we'll be talking about later, but whilst it was a narrow win in the EGM, we didn't know at that time that within a year we would be seeing a $23 million loss in 2.5 years at Nominet as a result of the investment and spend in Siglass. I don't think the EGM result would have been as close as it was if the Siglass thing had happened before then. I think we need to review that properly, quickly and thoroughly, both the Siglass debacle and parts of the Hayworth era, in order to understand what went wrong, in order to be able to then properly and with knowledge change that. Otherwise we're sort of swinging around in the dark to an extent. It's a big loss, but I also see it as an opportunity to learn and move forward. And so that is why I'm standing as an experienced domain name and commercial lawyer to drive that program forward, those governance changes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. And now we are moving into the second part, and there are 3 questions. There are 3 questions prepared for everybody, and so as explained before, Mr. McCarthy will start first and Mr. Davies will start second one. So the first question is, what is your experience working with Nominet?
So I would say the bulk of my experience with Nominet is that I've been a journalist for 25 years, and I write stories. I've written about the tech industry and the internet industry for the longest time, and I write about Nominet because I live in the UK, and at one point I lived in Oxford too. And then it was running a fundamental piece of the internet industry, and I was interested in how the internet about Nominet, which is mostly what I've done with Nominet. And then it's been mostly friendly, my interactions with Nominet. They weren't excited about a journalist turning up and saying what was going on, particularly when they had the votes in EGM votes in 2006. I pushed quite hard to be sort of allowed to go to that meeting. Originally they said it was a private meeting, and I said no, I wanted to write about it. So that was my start. And actually Leslie Cowley and Bob Gill at the time were fairly gracious, and they let me in, and then they talked to me afterwards when they lost those votes. So that's been my, been the flow of me. And then when I was working for ICANN, Nominet would turn up at meetings like the Internet Governance Forum, ICANN meetings, and I got on fairly well with Nominet staff. I think Nominet staff are actually extremely good at what they do. And that was the interaction. And then most recently, with Russell Hayworth, it was a little bit more aggressive, I would say, particularly when I started writing articles about the fact that there seemed to be a lot of money being spent on these businesses, and there didn't seem to be a lot of evidence that they were doing very well. So then I started writing articles about that, and about when they shut down the Nominet Trust, which I think was a horrible decision, and when they stopped publishing board minutes and said everything was commercially sensitive. So I started writing articles about that, which caused Russell to accuse me of fake news, which I loved, because then I knew I was really onto something. Like, no one does that unless you're onto something. A lot of you just said, oh, it's fine. They said, no, it's fake news. And so I thought, okay, this really does stink. So then I started writing a lot of articles at that point, and then Nominet just stopped talking to me. And then I thought, I'm just whistling in the wind. But then Simon picked it up, and bless him, and he really took my hat off to him. That was a difficult campaign, and he won the campaign. There have been campaigns in the past that Nominet has won with its resources. So then it was a little bit of a tricky relationship for a while, I would say, with the CEO accusing me of fake news. And then now, I mean, I've always gotten quite well with Nominet, apart from that layer of the board that when they make decisions which I disagree with, they've always not been willing to talk about it, which I think is a flaw. And I think you must have, especially for an organisation like Nominet, board members willing to talk openly and explain their views and justify their decisions. And that's the one big flaw I've always found with Nominet. That's always been my point of tension. Other than that, I've always liked Nominet. I have a bunch of .uk domains. I've always had a good experience. I think their tech team is good. I think their comms team is good. The issue I've had has been with senior management and board members.
Thank you. And Mr. Davies, what is your experience?
Well, my experience, like Kieran's, goes back quite a long way, but in a different area. I started doing domain name law in the early 2000s, and so me fairly early on came into contact with Nominet running its own dispute service, and that has continued I hesitate to say getting on for 20 years now. My relationship with the people that I was dealing with day to day in terms of disputes has generally been positive. I suppose mirroring what Kieren said, the difficulties that I've had with Nominet have tended to be in the upper echelons, and obviously that came to a head when I was elected to the board in 2008. I suppose it's perhaps unsurprising that if you're there on a platform of returning the business to a not-for-profit model and reducing the largesse of salaries and executive bonuses, that those executives are unlikely to welcome you with open arms. And so what is, I think, now seen post the public benefit EGM as the right way forward for Nominet was the position that I was consistently taking whilst both getting onto the board, on the board, and after being on the board. That brought me into conflict with those who were the early adopters, if you like, of the commercialization approach, Leslie Cowley and Bob Gilbert and co. And other senior executives, some of whom are still it mutated, if you like, to even more grandiose commercialisation under the Russell Hayworth era. When Simon started to put together the EGM, he and I spoke at length a number of times, and I got involved with the public benefit campaign right at the very beginning. So my position, I suppose, is rather boringly consistent. I believe Nominet should be run as a .uk registry primarily. It should be run in a way that is as close as possible to not-for-profit, that the existing surpluses should be used to, first of all, improve the infrastructure of Nominet, but then to have a properly structured public benefit giving process. At the moment, I think, whilst more is being given, the process remains, unfortunately, somewhat not transparent. So my experience, as with Kieren, goes back a long way, and I think now it's more, hopefully, in tune with the position adopted by the management at Nominet, and if elected, I would see my role would be to help push forward further with the existing changes that we're seeing.
Thank you. Now the second prepared question is, what do you think of the organizational structure of Nominet?
Yeah, so that's an enormous question, isn't it?
Here we go.
So the way the organizational structure of Nominet has been what has been behind all of the fights. And so I was thinking about how to answer this, because it's very difficult to do it, especially in less than an hour, you know what I mean? So I was thinking, well, what does Nominet want to do? That's the main, what does it want to do? That's what the first question we need to sort of figure out. What does it want to do that it can't do right now? What does it want to do that it thinks it should do? That's the question we sort of have to look at. What do I think of the structure? I think the structure is currently not correct. And there's been a lot of efforts, there's been actual changes, and there's been actual reports into what changes should happen. And the fact is, no one's ever really agreed. There's very strong views on both sides, but no one's ever really agreed as to what it is. Currently, what we've got worked well, doesn't work great now, but is better than what has been proposed, is what I would say. What's the solution? The solution, I would argue, is we've got to now build a member trust and have a proper discussion. I would argue that each of these changes each time has not been very well discussed, and then they've been pushed through, and then people have pushed back against it. So the only way I see it to resolve this is to actually have a proper discussion and to start stating, what does Nominet want to do? How do we want to achieve it? There is an issue in that right now. So the setup is that it's a member organization. The members can provide, the stewardship of it, but they're not the owners of it. That's the fundamental issue of Nominet right now. What we have to account for is that there are a lot of members that are only members because you get discounted .uk. We don't know how many. That's one problem. The other issue is that there are a lot more people interested in .uk than just people that are currently members. There are ISPs, there is the government, there is large business organizations, because this is now the internet and it's the UK infrastructure. So at some point we have to figure out what works for everybody. Fundamentally as well is we've got to make sure that Nominet looks after the end user as well, the actual .uk registry. We have to build a structure that makes sure it looks after them. So the answer is, what I think about it, I think it's wrong, and we all know it's wrong. The problem is, we haven't come up with it. The two solutions so far being pushed through have clearly been the wrong ones, and it's blown up again. The only solution is to, like I say, build up the trust, get people believing it, and then have a lot of transparency and have a proper process where you talk about what you want to achieve, and then you walk through the models. And I've never really seen Nominet do that. I don't know why it didn't do it the second time around. After the first time it blew up, but it never properly did it. So I think you have a proper process. It's not rocket science, this happens all the time, and develop a new structure that works for everybody.
Thank you. So, Mr. Davies, what do you think of the organizational structure of Nominet?
So,
thank you.
The organizational structure of Nominet is that it's a company limited by guarantee and instead of shares, each member pays a membership subscription each year. So in that sense, I'd have to disagree with Kieren that the company is owned by the members. It was originally set up in order to a company limited by guarantee generally, but Nominet was set up so that it wouldn't be accessible for capture and profit by those who owned it or who were running it. That was the original idea, and I am and have always been of the view that that was the correct approach, and a company limited by guarantee is the correct corporate structure for that sort of entity. The difficulty with Nominet is that from 2006 onwards, there have been of the organisation rather than by the members to loosen the corporate structure to enable the commercialisation that went on first under Leslie Cowley and an even greater scope under Russell Hayward. That is where I think the corporate structure has gone wrong. I believe that the most urgent issue facing Nominet now, we've had the EGM 18 months ago, we've had another AGM where 80% plus of the votes cast were for the three candidates supporting the public benefit platform. So whilst the EGM was a narrow win, the AGM last year was not. We've since had more information and seen the catastrophic level of loss on the Siglass venture of about $23 million. Now is the time to find out exactly what happened in that period of time, get an independent report done quickly, get recommendations from that report, and then engage in a conversation with members and say, look, where do you want this to go? But it's a two-way street of trust. Kieren is quite right to talk about trust and Nominet needing to regain the trust of members. But I also think Nominet needs to trust its members. It hasn't in the past demonstrated a trust for the membership. Well, the members said, and it was an uphill push for the public benefit campaign to win the EGM. It was a big uphill push, but it's the members who have been shown to be right. The Siglass loss shows that the membership was right to make that sort of stand and take that step. So now is the time to grasp the nettle, engage in a proper grown-up conversation with the membership, and then, in my view, and the membership may disagree, but in my view, the thing to do is to push back on those commercial changes in the corporate governance structure and go back to a situation where Nominet is running using what used to be referred to as the Bly principles in terms of not making a large surplus and essentially running as a not-for-profit and doing the job that it does well in running the .uk registry.
Thank you. And now the third question is
what the issue with Siglass is Nominet went on a very big commercial spree. Its CEO decided he wanted a cybersecurity company, which in and of itself was not a crazy idea, considering that at the time people thought that domains were going to disappear and everyone's going to have a Facebook page. It wasn't a crazy idea, but he did go and buy a company in California and paid $6 million for it, £4.5 million, and then we only found out, last week, in the first year's revenue was £26,000. Not only that, which is the bit that I really don't like, is that they then paid massive bonuses tied to that purchase. So then Sideglass got 265, 285, something like that, £1,000 in bonuses, signing bonuses. And then that year, Nominet paid its senior staff, tied in with the other acquisitions that also didn't work, over £500,000 in bonuses. That's the thing I have a major problem with. I think the strategy was not terrible, although it should have been explained very clearly to members, and it was not. I also know that there was at least one person, I think two on the board, that were opposed to the acquisition. And we don't, but I only found that out after, by literally speaking, calling those people up and talking to them after this disaster. Oh, by the way, they sold it for £1, I think.
$1.
$1, not even a pound. So 75p. 2 weeks ago. So it was a massive loss, and they plumbed millions of pounds into it. And they weren't answering members' questions about how is this going, because it doesn't look like it's going well. And I would argue, because I sat and went through all the finances when I was writing stories about this, I tried to figure out quite how much money has gone into this company and how much is coming, revenue they're making. And they, I would argue, purposefully made the finances opaque. They shifted the accounting period, they shifted the accounting methods that they use. I literally couldn't figure out what money had been spent and what money had come in. And that is not how accounts should work. So I think that's a major problem. Now, my biggest concern is not, well, I don't like the fact they bought this company when they should have found they had almost no money coming in. Nominet is not a VC, and it was acting like a VC. VCs, and I lived in San Francisco, I've been living there for 15 years. I moved back here recently, a few months ago. So I know the VC culture, and they have hundreds of millions of dollars, and they put their bets on different companies, and one of them pays off, like a Facebook, and they make billions. Nominet is not that company, and why they imagined they were that company blows my mind. So they went and spent $6 million on a small startup that required at least 5 years of pushing, and even then it wasn't destined to succeed at all. So I think that's a major problem, and I think it's a major failing that the board, number one, didn't say, no, you are not this company, you should never have bought it. And then number two, there was no awareness of it. Like members, and it's fundamentally members' money and .uk domain owners' money. A lot of money was being spent on this, and Nominet knew for years that it wasn't paying off, that the revenue wasn't going up. They knew this, and they were purposefully not letting members know that. And that's, so the problem I have is the board approved it. I mean, that's a fact. We didn't know anything about this. They did not make the figures clear, and when there was an opportunity, even if they'd done all this and Russell Hayworth had said this was a bad investment, it didn't pay off, even if he'd done that and said that to members, I think there's still an argument. Like, you could have said, okay, well, look, we understood what you were trying to do, you're trying to go in the cybersecurity arena, that kind of makes sense, that's Nominet's ballpark. But he didn't even do that. What he did was, when they started asking questions on the forum, he shut down the forum, and that was basically the end of him. That's the major problem I have. There's clearly not the financial controls within Nominet, despite them saying we have this wonderful governance system. Clearly it failed repeatedly, over and over again for several years, and the members were making a lot of noise about it, and I was making a lot of noise about it, and their response was to keep hiding the information and not responding. And that's my biggest worry about the whole thing, was they should have held up their hands and said this hasn't panned out, and they did not, and that's a fundamental cultural problem, and they should never be in that position. That's where I stand on Sideglass.
Thank you. Mr. Davies?
Well, I agree with an awful lot of what Kieren just said.
It's not surprising, though. I mean, it's not like there's an alternative life. It was good.
Well, I was going to say, I agree with quite a lot of what you said. I think it's I can't remember what words we used when I was in the member call with Andy Green, but horrific, I think, was one. To lose, as Kieren said, it's not entirely clear exactly how much has been lost, but let's work with a ballpark figure of $23.5 million in 2.5 years as a reasonable guess, because it was costing not only the purchase price, but it was costing around $600,000 a month to keep it going. We need the transparency that is missing from this process. We need to understand what happened and how it happened. At the moment, the impression I have is that the sort of finger is being pointed, not unreasonably to a large extent, at Russell Hayworth, who's obviously left the building, clutching his 300,000 leaving package, and saying, well, it was Russell's fault. Well, I'm unimpressed if Kieren is right that one or two directors at the time were opposed to the purchase, but said nothing at the time. There's no point, if you're an independent director, to anonymously later on brief that you were opposed to it in a meeting. The time to speak out was then, when the purchase decisions were being made, when the ongoing burn of 600 grand a month or whatever was ongoing. But where I would disagree with Kieren slightly is that it is a terrible, it was a terrible investment. Personally, I would have opposed it and the approach that it sort of exemplified in principle. I don't think it's Nominet's business to get involved in investing in companies like that. Clearly, I agree, Nominet shouldn't be acting like a VC, but I also don't think it should be engaging in commercial activities of this ilk, full stop. And again, I go back to the point that this needs to be looked at in detail so that we know what happened, who did what and when, and then also how can we stop it happening again, and what governance changes need to be written in to the memorandum and articles to make it impossible for another board and CEO to follow the same path, because right now, legally, they could. So what do we should take the loss from Siglass as something that we need to use as a learning experience. We need to find out what happened, publish that report so that we're clear to members and stakeholders what happened, and then take recommendations from that report, take them to the membership, and ask the members, how would you like us to change our governance in order to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Okay, so we need to find a way of disagreeing with each other. So I'm going to come a way of disagreeing with you. So I don't think
sorry, after that, then you will have the same opportunity.
Yeah, I don't think pushing for a view is the right thing, and I'll tell you why. Although I do think there should already be a lessons learned document that Nominet's put out, but they haven't. For the simple fact that the board won't approve it. Pragmatics, if you go in, if you get on the board and you push saying we need to have a review of this, the board won't approve it. They just won't. They've already made it clear. And the sort of Andy Green's made it clear he's not going to do it. Simon's made it clear he's not going to do it. So it's not going to happen. So pragmatically, if you go in and say must have this review, you've already lost the first argument. So that's why I would say that's not the right approach. And I don't like the literally the day after Russell Hayworth was paid off, they said, well, let's not talk about it, that's in the past. It's like, no, that was yesterday. So I don't like the not looking back in the past argument, I follow it, but I do think pragmatically you've got to move forward with it. We know what went wrong with this. What has to happen is it has to change so they can't do this again. It has to be a statement, we won't do commercial marketing, or it has to be this is our acquisition policy. So I would say, I'll try and put some kind of disagreement between us. I would say that not to have a review, but to push the board, learn the lessons and push them to make all those changes. That means it won't happen again.
Thank you.
Well, let's disagree, Kieren.
I figured we should, because we were agreeing way too much. You know?
I would say, and I've been involved in what part of what became a very, I'm not suggesting one would have an investigation on the scale of the one that I was involved in as a junior lawyer, but when you start an investigation, you do it because you don't know what you're going to find out. You don't do it because you know what answers there are, and at the moment, truthfully, I don't think that we know something went horribly wrong and a lot of money was lost, but we really don't know what happened. you say, well, the board won't do it.
No one.
Well, if a candidate is elected on a platform saying this is what I'm putting to the members, that I think there should be a review in order to establish how the company fell short, how certain individuals may have fallen short of their duties, some of whom may remain currently at Nominet, and how we need to learn from it. It's not just a navel-gazing exercise, but a way forward to understand where we've gone wrong in the recent past in order to then be able to put to the membership potential changes to the governance to prevent it happening in the future. Now, if the board as a whole, and I understand Andy Green's position, I'm not necessarily, it is possible to persuade people to change their minds. I haven't had that level of conversation with any of the board members as yet. But if the board made it impossible for that to happen, if the membership had at the AGM in the election said this is what we want, then I think that puts the board in a difficult position, and they should be listening to the members. And if that's what the members say, we want to find out, we want to learn from this experience, we want to find out if anybody who is still in the company has not been held accountable for any, if the investigation discloses serious shortcomings. It's accountability. It's not revenge or retribution. It's accountability for being in senior positions, extremely well remunerated, as Kieren said, even getting bonuses during this period. At the moment, the position is, well, it sort of happened, we know it was bad, it's behind us. That, I don't think, bluntly, is good enough. And if it means I have to try and persuade the rest of the board, if I'm elected, that that isn't good enough, I'm more than happy to go and advocate that. I think independent elected non-executives should be willing to have a position in principle and then set it out.
Thank you.
I think the problem will be is that we'll end up in conflict again. And so my goal, the reason I want to stand is I want it to put an end to the fighting. And I think that if you try and push the board and they say no, it restarts the fight. So I understand why, and I have some sympathy for your view. I mean, I would like to see it. I just don't think the board will allow it, and then I think it'll be more arguments, and I don't think a lot will be gained. I think more will be lost.
Thank you. And your last?
Well, whilst the board has said they would rather not do it, I don't think we're in a situation that's similar to the 2008 position where there was a complete diametrically opposed philosophy, and so I'm happy to go into that boardroom, explain to the members now and repeat that argument, debate within the boardroom, and hopefully change minds rather than have a conflict.
Okay, thank you. And now we're moving towards the next section. Those are Twitter questions. And if maybe we could agree that each of you would pick one Twitter question.
Sure.
Does it work with both of you?
I've written my answers, but not the questions down on here.
And meanwhile, you can start preparing your questions, gentlemen and ladies.
Well, let's take some questions while we're trying to find the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, let us start from this side.
My first question is to Jim, and then one question to Kieren. So Jim's question is, if you do get elected and you're on the board, and you have to then try to negotiate with other board members to come around to the idea of having a proper investigation, how many board members do you need to get to that? And also, if you don't get those board members, what will you do then?
Well, ideally, a board would function where one could try and find a position that the entire board was comfortable adopting. I don't see personally, find reviewing what happened in such a massive, in the context of a company of the scale of Nominet, loss. I mean, Andy Green used to be on the board of BT. If BT had lost an equivalent amount of money to this 23 million or whatever it turns out to be, we'd be talking multi-billions. Are you suggesting that BT wouldn't engage in some sort of investigation to find out how it had lost that pro rata, that amount of money? So I think it would be a case of trying to have grown-up conversations where you persuade the board as a whole. Ultimately, though, if one could persuade a majority on the board, then that is the position that the board takes. If the board as a whole rejected the idea, then I have to be open to the possibility that that happened because they were able to persuade me that it wasn't a good idea. But if that wasn't the case, then I would make it abundantly clear that I disagreed with the position that the board was taking, and that would be a matter for the membership. These are hypothetical situations. That would be a matter for the membership and the stakeholders to consider. And depending on, I mean, if we're in this hypothetical situation, I've won the election, so I've been elected with the support of the membership for this position. I honestly think that would be a pretty difficult position for the board to take, particularly given what's happened in the last 18 months. And in effect, you'd be saying they're insisting on not investigating one of the biggest financial loss, but also the sort of, it would be giving away that loss without taking advantage of the opportunity that it provides, which is to grasp the governance nettle, work out what we need to do to change the articles, and then take that to the membership. So it'd be a pretty massive statement, I think, from the board, and I'd be fairly disappointed with myself if I wasn't able to persuade them that that wasn't a good idea.
But will you resign then?
I wouldn't resign. I would continue to argue my position from inside the board.
Okay.
And the next question?
For Kieren again.
Yes, thank
so
you.
With regards to Nominet investments, how would you comprehend Nominet needs to invest in technology? It could, and my personal opinion, I'm not going to be director, but I think it's probably a good idea to investigate opportunities to buy companies which technology could be utilised for Nominet. How would you kind of work out a way that Nominet should be buying things where it actually does add value, especially buying British-owned technology?
Yeah, so then what's the acquisition strategy? I don't know. I'm not sure acquiring anything for the next few years is going to be a good idea for Nominet. I do think they have to have a whole conversation with the members about what would be good, what would be an allowable acquisition. I think that would be the start point. What would be the scenario in which you can acquire a company? I think what Nominet should do with this money, and it has a lot of money right now, and it's also agreed to put, is it 65 million into good causes? I think there's a huge opportunity to do non-profit, open source internet stuff. It's not like there's a shortage of problems. I spend a lot of time sort of in that internet governance world, the IGF and ICANN, and they're constantly looking, people that know what they're talking about, are constantly looking for funding for really useful things on the internet that will make the internet better, not things that will make them more money, things that will make the internet better that everybody can use. Security is a very big issue. David Conrad, I was talking about David Conrad the other day, he tried to set up a research arm within ICANN and wanted a budget, I think, of just $1 million. Ultimately didn't get through the budget process. But he's one of the absolute best DNS people in the world. Give David Conrad a research arm. You know, that's not like Nominet hasn't got the money. Give the people that are brilliant at this, that want to work in the non-profit sector, that can make the internet work better, give them the money to do so. That's where I think Nominet should be putting its money. Acquisitions, I don't know. If the acquisition makes sense, if you've got a couple of brilliant engineers in Mumbai, and it makes sense to get them in because they've come up with a new system for using blockchain and the DNS, I think you can argue that case. Going and popping over to San Francisco and spending $6 million on something that's bringing in £25,000 a year is a horrible strategy and should never happen again.
Thank you. And let us see, we'll get back to the questions. Are we ready for the Twitter feed? For the Twitter questions?
Rex had one, although I'm not sure, we've sort of walked around. It was, what's the most urgent issue facing Nominet governance at the moment? I mean, we covered that. I feel like we largely covered that. Unless you've got,
Well, I have a follow-up question to that. So
go.
Yeah.
If we could get through the Twitter, sorry, and then we'll get to everybody, to all the attendees.
I mean, yes, we have covered, I think, a fair bit of it already, but I would stress from my point of view...
So in this case, could you read it, please? The full question,
was,
and then...
What's the most urgent issue facing Nominet governance at the moment?
And then you are the first one who starts, of course.
So no, Jim, go first. You've got an answer, let me...
As you wish.
Well, I think we've already touched upon it. I think the most urgent thing is to learn, is to realise the detail of what happened with Sightglass, and to learn from that and put governance changes to the members sooner rather than later. There's a lot of talk about taking our time and people getting into new jobs and all the rest of it, and improving communications ahead of changing the substance. I think the way to engage properly with members and rebuild trust is to actually get it done. And so we need to start dealing with the problems, addressing them, offering solutions, and getting the members engaged in that regard. In terms of the memorandum and articles, I think there's a secondary matter that's urgent, which is how the voting occurs at Nominet, the weighted voting. There's a complicated algorithm that Nominet itself applied wrongly for a number of years at general meetings, and so there are questions both as to whether or not the weighted voting is actually in breach of the Companies Act in any event, and so unlawful, but secondly, if it is lawful, whether it is appropriate and how the company should be run.
I agree that the voting system's a mess. I mean, it's such a mess that Nominet's got it wrong. Its own people have got the figures wrong twice. I mean, that's what a mess it is. It's not right. But I say the most urgent issue is two things. One is board minutes. I want the boards to produce minutes that cover what they actually discussed. Like the last board meeting, they literally discussed, and it was news to me and seemingly to everyone else. They discussed, should we move to one member, one vote? This just pops up. None of us knew this conversation was going to happen. It's a fundamental aspect of how Nominet functions. And they're having a board discussion about it. We're not even aware of it. And then there's 3 lines that don't give you any information. The first thing, I want to know what each board member said, what their stance is, what the staff paper said, and I'm assuming there's a staff paper. If there isn't, there should be. Board minutes would be my number one urgent issue. I want to know what the board's discussing. I don't see any reason in the world why they can't produce minutes that explain what they actually discussed in their actual meeting. And the second sort of tied-in issue is Nominet needs to understand who its members are. So I was talking to Davies yesterday, who's Nominet's manager of engagement. I forget his full title. And he said, I've been in the job for a year. I hope this doesn't upset you. I've been in the job for a year, and I still don't really know who 1,500 of these members are, which is fine because for years no one's really known who these members really are. But this madness, particularly when those members do have a vote, and it is a member organization, it's madness that you don't know who these people are or what they want out of Nominet. So I would say that the second fundamental issue is go find out who these people are. And then do they want to be? I mean, the usual voting in board elections is 10 to 15%. And in the EGM, which was obviously a huge issue, it was still only 53%. So there's a huge numbers of members that don't even vote when the fundamental underpinnings of the actual organization are going to be shaken up. So who are these people and what do they want? this is what I think Nominet needs to do, like now. We need to know who those people are and engage them or disengage them, but at least figure it out so that we can move forward a bit.
Thank you. And now the tweet of the choice. Yes, the choice of the tweet. Yes.
Well, first of all, can I be boring and agree with Kieren about the board minutes? Because actually, we had some victory in that in 2008, 2009 by getting them published or reports published. And I'm also the company secretary of Open UK, which is a not-for-profit, and a very large part of their board minutes are put into the public domain actually on GitHub. So I'm very much in tune with Kieren on that, and have a track record of being able to achieve that, and also being involved in not-for-profits that do that. And that sort of comes to one of...
Sorry, if there was a remark, then there is your answer.
I was coming to one of the questions that Carl asked on Twitter, which was to do with access to the members' hub, and that the candidates are not, or I think weren't in Kieren's case. He is now a member.
I joined in order to
get onto the hub.
Yeah.
And Carl's question is, should there be greater access, and how do we know what members are thinking? And
then probably if that was the tweet, then we can swap. And now,
well, so the truth is, so I was informed by the company secretary, because I had made a formal request. It's right. I'm standing for the board. I'd like to access to the hub so I can find out what people are talking about, what's going on. And so I said, and they said, oh, sorry, we have this policy where you can't do that. So I said, can you raise it up the flagpole? So apparently, then I was told the board discussed it at their meeting and they decided, no. Here's the thing, that isn't in the minutes either. So they had a whole discussion about that, and that's not even in the minutes. So they said no. So I thought, right, so I'm in a position now where I don't know. So I thought, oh, the hell with it, I'll be me. We've sort of been wondering whether to become a Nominet member for a decade. So I thought, right, okay, I'm standing for the board. So I became a member, and I got access to the hub, and it was as underwhelming as I feared it would be. So, yeah, it should. I know why they, and in fact, I can see an argument for having some stuff on the hub, but really, like most of it should be public. I mean, definitely board, and a lot of the updates, and I don't like. There's no reason to have it behind a login paywall. I'm going to call it a paywall because that's pretty much what it is. There's no reason for it, and I don't like it. And I would argue hard the benefits of making it public. Because it's not like everyone and their dog's going to suddenly rush read Nominet board minutes. I mean,
crash the server.
The idea of having to log in order to read what's going on in your own organisation is a little mad. And I think it should just be there. It should be published, and published in HTML, not in PDFs. You know. So I'm not a fan. The hub has its uses, but they've basically put everything behind the hub. I will argue strongly there's significant benefits to putting it on a website.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I agree with that.
I know we keep agreeing. It's appalling.
And I'd go. The general advantage of putting as much as possible into the public domain, I think, is very difficult to argue against. But the specifics of making it difficult for non-member board candidates to engage. I mean, I've gone through various sort of third degrees in order to be allowed to attend the AGM where the results from last year's election, which I was in, and also to take part in members' calls where I've done it as a consultant on behalf of members, but the sort of barriers that are put in place are completely counterproductive in my view. And at the very least, when they're, it's not like there's a horde of thousands of election candidates. What peril is there to allow Kieren, for example, to access the hub or whatever, rather than forcing him to pay for membership? Really is frankly ridiculous, isn't it?
There's another issue as well, which is that a lot of the material has just been wiped clean. There's hundreds of links to stuff that was on Nominet's website, board minutes, reports, hundreds and hundreds of links, and I don't know when it happened, but they're no longer there anymore. So I mean, I was tracking through trying to refresh my memory of all the stuff that's happened, and I would click on a link and it's like you get the same web page. So Nominet's removed a lot of its own history from its own website, and that bugs me as well, to be honest. I don't like it. I'm sure it's there on a server.
It's on Web Archive, which is not appropriate.
They show archive.nominet.uk, but if that's what they want, but it shouldn't be lost.
If the system was closed, is it on archive?
A lot of the stuff, some of the letters that were sent back in 2005, they've disappeared. I mean, that's not right. Not for an organisation running a registry. The history should be there. It's been taken down. I would argue that should be back up.
Thank you. So now we continue to the questions.
Can I just challenge that? The concept that the nominal cost of Nominet membership for the nominal amount of involvement us members are allowed to have with Nominet is a barrier I think is false. If you want to have a say now as a member and get involved with Nominet, you have to pay the fee. If you're prepared to put the time, effort and what have you into being significant to Nominet in terms of running for the board, and you're not already a member, I would question why. Because the nominal cost to get involved now in building that is 100 quid a year. I mean, it really is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. So if you're not prepared to get involved at the lowest level at 100 quid, forget the 500 quid then. But if you're not involved at the lowest level,
£600.
Right, if you're not involved at £600, if you're not involved at £2 grand,
Can I have 1,000?
why should you be involved at the 50 grand paid for and management responsibility of a company you say nothing about?
You make a fair point. The issue I had was that in the past I was allowed to go, in fact I was allowed on as a journalist when I made the case to the CR. I said, right, I want to see what's going on with this public benefit organisation running the .uk registry, and they said okay, and they gave me a log on to the forum before Russell shut it down. And so I asked for the same thing for the hub where this is, the information's going on in the forum where members are discussing. And they said no, and I said, well, I've put myself forward as a candidate, I'd like to see what's going on. And they said, no, I think that's a weird argument. So I did do what you suggested, and I became a member to get on. And I'm glad that I did it. And now I'm also bought in now.
Yeah,
there's no way out.
now you're committed.
Now I'm committed. But I do think it was more that, exactly like you said, it was more that there was a barrier and another barrier. I'm willing to bet they never thought I would do it. It's a bit odd. It's a bit odd to be in that feeling that I was literally saying, oh, I'm interested in what's going on with this organisation, and I'm standing for the board. And they're like, well, no, you can't have access to that. And that's a very weird culture that I don't like. And I would seek to change that. It should be, yeah, of course. Of course. I mean, you're standing for the board. You should find out.
I'm in agreement with the 90% of what's in the hub should be on the league website. There's no point to hide it. There are cases, and I'm involved in various forums and various discussions, where there are things said within those arenas that are not meant to be public. And so there does need to be some form of wall over some levels of discussion, but 90% of what's in there absolutely should be on their website now.
I would point out that whilst I take your point, Rob, a lot of members are actually employees of companies who are members because they're registrars. They're not paying. Individuals are not paying the £500 themselves.
But links are members. They have one single domain name. It's not for the discount. They do it so they get involved. They can have a say. They can vote.
Yes, but I'm saying as an individual, a lot of people are members through their organisations. They're not paying £500 to engage in Nominet business.
Okay, so your question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
a comment and a question really. So, member benefits and things. So, there's confusion as to actually who are the members. There's 1,500 members you said who David doesn't know who they are or what they are there for and things. And this comes around to, it's all very circular because, or cyclical, because the thing is that One is you don't know who the members are. Two, you don't know what benefits to give. Three, you think, actually, are all the members registrars? So my question leads on from that, because here it says, ensure UK works in interest of all its members. I know it's your point, but it's for both of you. I think that Nominet should work in the interest of all its members and stakeholders. And taking that in mind, I would ask both of you, do you think the membership should be expanded? If no, why? If yes, why and how?
Okay. Kieren?
Yes, I do. I think it should be expanded. We're talking about the .uk registry, and a lot of people are very interested in this, not just people that buy and selling domains. So yes, it should be expanded. I'm not sure what the system would be to involve the average user, because Nominet should be working in the interest not just of its members. If I think it's in this article of association, it should also be in the interest of the .uk registry and its users as well. There should be some kind of system.
So,
Yeah.
just an expansion on my question.
Yeah.
Is it just about .uk or Nominet? Because Nominet doesn't only do .uk, so it's an expanded question in a way that. So I'm trying to get from you what your thoughts are on what Nominet should do. Because, for example, Nominet, the members didn't have any say in Sideglass. Because why would they? They don't have a vote on it, because the vote only counts for .uk through there. And I would ask you, when you answer this question, to please make sure that you keep registrars and membership separate.
Okay, so good question. It should be expanded. How do you expand it? I don't know yet. I think you need to have representation of users somehow. I know how ICANN does it, and I would not recommend it. This doesn't work well, but in theory it works well. In reality, it doesn't. I do think you need big business groups who really depend on .uk. I mean, it's easy. It should be relatively easy to make the case. I'm going to talk about .uk. It should be easy to make the case. You should be involved in this organisation that runs .uk, because frankly, a huge amount of business is now reliant on .uk. It's just a fact. You should have more ISPs involved than currently are. Yeah, you need to expand it, and that's how we make it work. And there's also a lot of the other registries do, or big infrastructural companies do work this way. They have a broader base, and I think Nominet needs a broader base. But then how do you get from where we are right now to there without it becoming difficult? I don't know. That needs some serious thought. And then Nominet, well then the question about the broader Nominet, that's the bigger question about what should it be doing? Should it be running, and I don't want to say the Welsh name for .Wales, because you know how to pronounce it.
Cymru.
Cymru. Okay, so you have to say it each time, and then I'll just copy. I think there's a case for doing that. I think it's quite good, and I think I wish they would kind of push it a bit more. I could see a Nominet, if they ran it well, I could see a Nominet constellation of TRDs that work in a non-profit way that people are supportive of and represents them. I could see that working. Not right now, but I mean, I could see it theoretically working like that. So yes, I think it should be expanded. How do you do it? I'm not going to come up with a solution right now because it's a little too complicated. But I think it would provide a greater foundation, and the current members we'd just make sure they still get what they want. All members still get what they want and what they need, and then you put greater stability. There needs to be some more stability to it, and I think you do that by expanding the membership in a smart way. I don't know exactly how you do it.
Thank you. Mr. Davies?
Well, first of all, since it came up, .Cymru is actually probably a regrettable example of Nominet's engagement, because what they effectively did was, having not been chosen as the back end for a genuine community bid, they usurped that and undercut it by offering to do it, as I understand it, at no cost to the Welsh Government, which meant the Welsh Government abandoned a genuine community-driven project, adopted the Nominet one, and its level of success is there for people to see for themselves. And that is a sort of example as to why I'm hesitant and cautious about Nominet expanding anywhere beyond its existing core.uk role and the government security role that sort of comes with that. In terms of the membership structure, As Kieren put it when one is troubled by a question, good question. For example, in Australia, they have changed the membership structure so that there is effectively a low or no cost membership for individuals in .au, as well as sort of commercial registrars and so on. So they've got a multi-tiered membership model. The difficulty for Nominet in terms of how and whether it ought to, but if one accepts it, or if a consensus was that it ought to expand its membership, is how to rework and get a sufficient majority of the existing owners of the company, who are the existing members, to vote to change the constitution in order to do that. And there is a specific clause in the Nominet constitution that deals with membership subscriptions and so on. That requires a 75% majority of votes cast. So it's sort of like, on a hypothetical level, would one want a more engaged and wider Nominet membership, even if we're told the member engagement team doesn't really know who more than half of the current membership are? Does the problem get bigger if you create a bigger membership? I don't know. But if that was the approach to take, you then actually have some practical difficulties in the current structure that would require the cooperation of a large proportion of the membership. So if I'm honest, I would say that there are more immediate and striking issues in governance that need to be tackled in terms of removing the commercialisation drift in the constitution that's occurred. And so personally, I would say this is a good question, thank you Dinesh, but I wouldn't see it at the top of the priority list.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Okay, so my question is, given the fact that Nominet has built up substantial revenue surplus, do you think that indicates that the domain costs have been too high in the period during which that surplus has been built up? And if you'd been on the board during that period, and you thought the prices had been too high, would you have said so?
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I definitely should put up.
The other board members should say so.
Okay, so let's start one by one. As agreed.
Can I come in?
Is it?
Yeah,
Does
it's
it
about
relate-
this point.
Okay.
So I was a board member at the time that the prices were put up, and yeah, I did see when you're presented with figures during a board meeting, and you look at the figures and go, oh yes, of course this. But when you're presented with figures, you're only given one side of the story. I battled greatly with it. I made lots of noise internally about it. Spoke to Russell, spoke to Ellie, spoke to a whole lot of different board members. But at the end of the day, I was just one lone voice. So when you're a one lone voice on a board of 10, it's very, very difficult to say, actually, yes, you know. So of course my objection was recorded. As to whether that came out is a different matter, because the board communique only says this was
What do you think the average,
So sorry, the question was not about the candidates. So
Yeah.
could you comment it, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, I get it, and I've been in that situation too. You lose the argument, and then there's always the pressure, like, well, we all need to be unanimous behind this. We need to support this.
Just back off on that, do you think, looking at the organisation now, it's clearly making a surplus?
Yeah.
Yes, we agree on that?
Yeah.
Well, once you not for the last couple of years,
Well,
it's all been
take
written off by
Cyglass,
Cyglass.
yeah.
But yes.
Yes.
Great company. So what's the question? Yes, it's making.
So yeah, do you see that as, it's making a surplus, and therefore, do you think prices are too high?
I think
I think everybody who owns a domain portfolio, that wants to
Yeah.
No.
So,
Prices are too high.
Thank you.
so historically, and indeed, as Dinesh said, he was on the board for part of this, but clearly spoke out about it internally. There was a price rise sort of policy pursued by Russell Hayworth and Co. in order to give themselves an increased surplus in order to engage in their frolics into the commercial space. So if we accept, as I hope we all do now, that Nominet shouldn't be running off and investing in commercial businesses of any type, of any substance, then the raison d'etre for those price rises has gone. So whilst I've seen the board say, well, these are difficult times, or clearly they are, there's inflation and all the rest of it, I would say this is a time to put back, because the members, the registrants, not just the members, but ultimately those 11 million domains are not all registered by Nominet members, they're registered by ordinary people and ordinary businesses. And whilst you can't guarantee that a reduction in price will be reflected in the retail market, it does allow for, within that competitive market, that prospect. And so this isn't about, whenever I've talked about this, it's always been presented, including by Kieren, I think, in some of his articles when I was on the board. We were the domainers, and we had an interest in reducing price because I'm not personally a domainer, but some of my clients were and are. We had a personal interest in reducing price because they have large portfolios. That was never my driving force behind price reduction or price freezes as they then were. My objective is that I see creating a surplus in .uk as a sort of invisible tax on UK consumers, and I don't think that's right. And so I think the first thing we should be doing is looking. There's 100 million plus surplus. I know some of it's being allocated for various things. If the company can survive losing $23 million in 2.5 years on Sightglass, it can survive reducing domain name prices by the same token, and even losing the money on Sightglass hasn't eaten into the surplus. It's still there. So the finances of Nominet, in a general global sense, are robust and strong, and the need for these increased prices has gone, hopefully never to return. So at the very least, I would be looking at clawing back those price rises that went through in the Hayworth era, and working, one would have to be getting into the sort of thing that Dinesh was talking about in terms of seeing the figures and all the rest of it. But in principle, I think that is the right approach.
Thank you. And your? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a very complicated question because this is fundamentally what's caused most of the problems in Nominet, which is the economics of the domain name industry are a little nuts. If you look at what VeriSign gets to increase the price of .com. The price of the cost of running a large registry has gone down over time per domain. The price per domain of registries has gone up. And so there's all of these companies that are awash with money. That's across the internet industry. VeriSign is obviously the best example because people just keep buying more .com. They don't move away. It's not an elastic market at all. And the same is true with the UK. The UK market is not elastic. If you put up a price, people don't go, oh, well, that's it, I'm going for .eu. They don't. It's .uk, and they're attached, and they've built their company around it, they've built their business around it. It's worth, I would say for each business, it's worth $1,000 a year. Realistically, if it was like losing our .uk, then, so the economics are nuts. That's the problem. And the problem has been that Nominet has been making this huge profit, excess revenues, I think I should call it from now on. And they've not been sure what to do with it. And that money has caused a lot of problems because you've had people coming in, they see a lot of money, and they have big dreams about what to do with that money. That's been the problem. So I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that it's a big problem, and it's not going to go away easily. I think the only decent solution is to get an economist on it. Now, theoretically, I would say yes, those price rises, I would argue, although I'd like to see the books, I would argue that they were put in by Russell in order to pay for his spending spree. There was never a good rationale behind it.
To everybody.
Yeah. I mean, there was never a good rationale behind those price increases. They said, I can't remember what there was basically 4 words they put together, and it was bad rationale. And it was just to pay for buying stuff and whatever. The difficulty with lowering the price is it could signal something else to the market. It could cause a massive increase in .UKs. It could cause a sell-off. We don't know. That's the problem. Now, if you're on the board of .UK registry, you would have to, before you did something like that, I think you would have to do what we would have wanted Nominet to do before it did the price rise, which is actually think it through and come up with a rationale for it. So I'm not opposed to the idea, but I do think you would have to do what we wanted Nominet to do the first time around. Every time there's a price increase, there's been a much better policy behind it, a rationale, an explanation, some economic study of what goes on with it. So I know what you're arguing, and it's a good argument. Those prices were put up. I don't think they should have been put up. There's no excess money. That's caused the problems. It's a disaster. Moving the price, I think there should be a good system that's in place from now on and forever. Whenever it goes up or goes down, you've got a solid process and so that everybody's like, this is why, this is the rationale, this is the economics. That's what I think is a stable registry should be doing.
Thank you. And
can I just add something?
Yes.
And Kieren can come back on the EGM platform for public benefit included reducing domain name prices, despite a massive effort by the incumbent Nominet board and executive. That succeeded. Last year, more than 80% of the vote at the AGM were for 3 candidates who stood on that platform and were in favour of price reductions. 2 of those candidates obviously were elected to the board. I'm not making any, I'm not hiding that I maintain that position in standing for the board this year. So if I was elected to the board this year, that would mean that the last 3 board elected directors were all elected on a clear and unequivocal platform to reduce prices. Now that doesn't mean going crazy, it means doing some careful review and so on and taking it to the membership. I mean, historically the price could only be changed with the agreement of 75% of the members. And I would suggest from where we're sitting now, that actually wasn't a bad thing to have kept, and it's perhaps regrettable that it was removed, because it enabled what we then saw in the Hayworth era, the ability to raise prices in order to fund these frolics. So if all 3 of the most recently elected directors are doing so on the basis that we should be looking at the practicalities at least of a price reduction, then I think it's very difficult for the rest of the organisation to resist that. It should be.
I can see that. I just say I'd put structure around it. Like the difficulty with reducing, let's say we'll reduce it by whatever price Russell, let's just say Russell put it up because he did, and I don't think the board had enough strength to stop it. Probably just reducing is what's the rationale? Is the rationale Nominet shouldn't be making any excess revenues? Is the rationale should be making percentage excess revenues? Is the rationale should be, I mean, what's the reason? How much do you reduce it by and why? There needs to be a rationale behind it. If you build it and it's a rationale everyone can agree to, and they say that seems like an excellent way of deciding .UK prices, and then you apply those criteria, and then it leads to a price reduction, great. But I do think there's a risk of being as arbitrary as Nominet has been in the past if you don't build a structure around it. And I think going into the future, there should be a structure around it. I think this is the next stage of Nominet, to try and avoid whoever's in charge making decisions because that's what they came up with that month. And I think you need to get away from that. It needs to be duller. It needs to be more institutional. And I do think prices are the big thing. Prices is what has caused so many of these problems. So particularly around prices. There has to be, and it's not going to be hard. There's millions of economists in the world that would love the opportunity to dig into domain names and figure out a good system and so on and so forth. And they could probably go sell their services to VeriSign and ICANN and whoever else. But I do think a rationale would be really good. And I do think there'll be an opportunity to pull in members. What is our rationale? What does Nominet exist for? What do we want this money for? What are you going to do with it? That would be a great opportunity to...
Thank you.
Oh, and I do think, sorry, very quickly, that would be a way to engage people. You say, potentially the prices will go down, then I think you'll get a lot of members coming in and having that conversation.
I would say that the EGM and the last AGM, and if I was elected this AGM, would be, it's not this month's flavour of the month, it's the members making their views clear. And as I said earlier, I think trust is a two-way street. So whilst Nominet needs to earn the trust of the members, I think it also needs to show that it trusts the members. And so if the members keep telling Nominet this is what we want, then Nominet should be listening and should be taking, the members own the company. The Nominet should be listening and should take action consistently, that is consistent with what the members are telling it.
Okay, so a couple more questions. Yes, and then you can proceed. So Rob, thank you.
I'll try and do a trick on this one then. Now in the current board structure and how it's automatically heavily weighted in favour of Nominet and Nominet's selected NEDs versus member appointed NEDs, which of your campaign policies are you prepared to compromise on or horse trade away in order to ensure you can get other members to vote along your side?
Thank you.
As other members of the board, not other members.
Thank you. Kieren first. Thank you.
So I don't think I would have to trade them away in the sense that what I'm doing is reflecting back what they've said needs to be done. They said, oh, well, member trust is lacking. Oh, well, we need greater transparency.
Not for Nominet people you've got to convince, which
I would give them back their words and say, and this is how we do it. Okay. Or I give them back their words and say, this is how we're failing on that. So I honestly, I don't have any skin in this game in the sense that my only goal is to try and stop this from happening all over again. And the reason why I think it's a window is because there's going to be more people on the board and it's going to rotate. And the truth is, according to the Articles of Association, Nominet can put 4 directors that it chooses, right? There's currently 2. I might get this wrong. It can put 4 staff on. This is what it can do it tomorrow if it wants. And then there's 4 member, I think that's right.
Yes, 4, 4 and 4. 8 of which are Nominets and 4 are...
And right now, there's not that because of the public benefit EGM where they basically booted them off, so there's no way and they were named as well, so they can't bring them back on again. So we're in a slightly, this is what it's a window of opportunity, it's a slightly risky thing. This can turn very quickly with the wrong people on. And so I see what I'm sort of pitching is, I'll get in there and I'll make it work for the members and I'll make the transparency work. And then at least even if you end up with the wrong people on board, it'll be a lot harder for them to do what they've done in the past. So I'm not in there to fight with anybody. I'm in there to try and make the Nominet work so we don't have these fights again.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, again, I'd probably largely agree with what Kieren said in the sense that I don't see this as a situation that should be something of conflict. The membership spoke in the EGM, the membership spoke in last year's AGM, and they'll speak again in this AGM. If there's a clear path that the members are speaking to, if, for example, I was elected and there would then be 3 public benefit candidates on the board, all 3 of the elected positions on the board since the EGM would have been filled by public benefit members, then I think the words that are also coming from the board are very conciliatory to that and an acknowledgement of the errors of the past. Nobody is standing up for the Hayworth era. There isn't a situation like the conflict which was certainly there between a large chunk of the membership and the the in-house, with the conflict that was in the EGM, but also the conflict in 2008. That sort of philosophical conflict, I don't think, is actually still there. Nobody's arguing that we should retain the commercialisation approach, for example. So you asked what I would have to horse trade away. The short answer is I would rather hope nothing, in the sense that who can argue that the governance model doesn't need, who can sensibly argue that the governance model doesn't need reviewing? Who can argue that that we shouldn't be looking at price reductions if that's what the members keep telling the company they want? We do have potentially 4 Nominet executive directors, although, as Kieren pointed out, they're a bit hard to find at the moment. But we also have 4 independent appointed non-executive directors. I don't think it's necessarily right to think that they would automatically align with the
Do you not mean the last lot, because they pretty much never went against what Nominet said?
I did. I was on the board with some of them. But I hope that there's a genuine sea change occurring. I think, as Kieren described it as a window of opportunity, I think it's a time to not slow down, because there is that, we're sort of in that moment where the momentum is going in one direction, and now isn't the time to sort of take our time. Now is the time for action, getting things done. And if one found oneself in a situation, which I'd hope and wouldn't expect to do, where there was resistance to that, then that's an issue that would have to be dealt with at the time. But the short answer is everybody isn't going to agree on everything, but I can't see something, I'm not throwing something out there as a sacrificial lamb at the moment, and I would hope that, broadly speaking, if supported by the members in the election, then that's 3 public benefit members elected, as well as the EGM. It's really hard to see how one could legitimately continue to resist that, and I don't think that's what's happening.
Thank you. And the last question, probably to Andrew. What about you? You've been quite surprisingly.
The voting rights are top heavy, so the top 20 have the most votes, as you know, on the top 25. And Volker's from that constituency, and therefore is likely to be favourite to win just purely based because he's from that constituency and knows the most members. Do you think the voting rights should be reviewed or changed anyway? Would you like to see 1 member, 1 vote, for example, or would you like to see some kind of allocation of votes depending on the number of domains?
Before we go into that, maybe we could explain, maybe Jim, you could explain what...
Kieren can explain if we're talking about the voting.
Maybe we could explain about, to those who do not know.
So it's a mess, in simple, and no one knows what voting rights are until we'll decide to close the register.
Okay.
So yes, for those who aren't fascinated by Nominet's articles and bylaws, who amongst us isn't? There are bylaws that are attached to the Nominet articles that can be changed by the board following consultation with members. That last happened in 2006. There is a mathematical formula that I will not try and explain because I have no understanding of it. In my defence, I would say neither did Nominet, because Kieren pointed out to them and Andrew pointed out to them that they were actually applying it wrongly for a number of years, although they insisted at the time that it hadn't made any difference to the outcome of any of the votes that had occurred, but it was impossible to actually test that claim. Which sort of takes me into starting to answer the question, which is, that clearly can't be the right solution if the entity itself is getting it wrong. And even last year we had a situation where members who took up a price promotion ended up losing large chunks of their votes because the invoices were issued on the 7th of the month and the voting rights were calculated on the 1st of the month, and so a lot of domains under management weren't counted for voting purposes. So it can't be right that it works. The detail of how it works is clearly problematic. To my mind, there are two other questions. The first is it philosophically right that large registrars, many of whom are overseas corporations, carry a significant weight in terms of the votes in Nominet? The default position in a company, a member-driven company, is one member, one vote. I mean, companies limited by guarantee are sort of often things like golf clubs and things like that. Well, you don't get more votes because you score better or bring more money in at the bar or something. You don't get more votes in the golf club elections. So there's a philosophical debate on that, but there's also a question, I think, that takes it outside of the argument or conversation as whether it's right or wrong, and the question is it actually lawful? I have a fairly strong feeling that the Nominet articles breach the Companies Act, and therefore the weighted voting is unlawful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the current system is clearly ludicrous on the face of it. If you were to explain to anybody, oh, how many votes I've got, 43,269, is clearly ludicrous. Oh no, sorry, they've redone it. I've got 41,462. It's obviously nonsensical, and it doesn't work. And Nominet has miscalculated in the past. So that is not right. That's the first fundamental thing. We should just all accept it's not right and must change in some way. My thinking, the first thing they should do is boil it down to an understandable system, which is grab X number of like most members. If you look at how the domains are spread across them, most members are going to end up with 1 or 2 votes in terms of numbers. I think we should do that. Boil it down mathematically. Exact same system right now. GoDaddy will have 420 votes. 2 Cows will have 122 votes. You'll have 5 votes. Then let's at least do that number 1. Then you can actually see in your mind's eye, what is this system that we've created? You know, and then I think when you look at that, you say, well, hang on, why does GoDaddy get 420 votes? And then you should then say, right, all of these 1 votes, the 1,500 members that not even Nominet knows who they are, what do they do with those votes? You know, we need to have a whole discussion about what are we even doing right now with these votes? Right now, I think the system is, and I don't even remember, and I remember studying this recently, I think the system is a quarter of the votes are spread evenly, and then 3/4 of the votes are spread according to domains. I think, but I don't remember because it keeps changing. And then that changes according to how many people actually vote. And so it's a disaster. Now, the big question is, do you move to 1 member, 1 vote? I mean, I love the simplicity of it, but I think because we've got 1,500 members that we don't even know, that's dangerous. You could easily see if this wasn't the UK, if this was the US, someone would have already gamed the system, and someone would already have control by giving those 1,500 people in LLCs. They would already have gamed the system. As soon as you open that up, you'll figure out how to game the system. What I think needs to happen is we need to have a conversation about what are we doing here? Like what is the usefulness of these member voting? Why would you not have 1 member, 1 vote? What's the rationale behind it? What's the fear of having 1 member, 1 vote? Then you say, okay, well, let's do a weighted voting. Okay, well, what would we want the results to look like? Would we want and I keep using GoDaddy because GoDaddy is the big beast. Would you want GoDaddy to have 20 times the amount, 5 times the amount? What's the rationale for that? You have to have a rationale, and then you have an algorithm, and then I think most importantly, you need to keep an eye on the market because the market is changing. I mean, since the votes were created, there's been massive amounts of consolidation and shifting in the market. You all know this. And so it changes. So the system was not great when it's put in place. It's really not great now. But if you want to do it and you want to fix it, that's the conversation you have. You boil it down, you make it simple, and then you say, what do we want? How is voting supposed to work? And then you create a model for that, and then you make sure you update it, I think, each year. And then you do it so that it's simple enough that you don't end up with 256,422 votes, you know, and then they miscalculate it, and then they reproduce the new spreadsheet, which, you know, Kieren and Andrew go through. It's just madness. So that has to change, and I think there is an opportunity to get it right, and we should try and get it right. But no, I mean, I hate the system right now, and I don't think anyone can really support it. It doesn't work. It's not good, and the caps are almost arbitrary. I think the caps that were put in place were more or less to get through the changes that Leslie and Bob wanted back in 2006, wasn't it, if I remember correctly? It's been monkeyed around with so many times. There needs to be a clear rationale, and then the model fits the rationale.
Okay, this concludes. Okay.
What about making voting compulsory?
Well, Australia does it.
If you don't vote, you don't get membership. You're not.
So what happens? You don't vote, and then you're not.
You don't get everybody just tick the first box on the form.
You can spoil your vote, or you could be undecided, but make sure then you know who everybody is.
So, no, I hate that idea, but I like what's behind it, which is to increase the responsibility of members, which I think is a peer pressure thing. And so, yes, if there's greater member trust, which there needs to be, then there'll be an element of peer pressure. And also, if you have better networks and members talk to one another more, which Nominet, by the way, should have the mindset of we're a member organisation, and they should be like members talking to one another is a good thing. That's the cultural shift that needs to happen. And then if you get to that point, then voting will be something that you do in the same way you do elections here. You do it because your family votes and your friends vote. You say, I'll vote too. I don't like the idea of compulsory.
Yes, Jim.
I'm not in favour of compulsory voting, but I would say I think you would get far higher turnout and more member engagement from those members who currently are not engaged if they thought that their vote carried some weight.
Knew what their vote carried.
Well, but in effect, if we're putting it into a sort of general election sort of analogy, imagine if you had one vote and you knew that, as indeed it used to be, the man the Lord of the Manor has 500 votes. Well, it doesn't really encourage the person with just one vote to go to the ballot box if they know in reality a handful of very large landowners have de facto or significantly more control. And to take a point that Kieren made about potentially gaming the system if it went to one member, one vote, I would actually possibly argue the opposite, which is the current system, which consolidates power in the hands of a limited number of large corporate members, has actually resulted, I would argue, in the system being gamed from within Nominet. So both in the Cowley-Gilbert era and then in the Hayworth-Wood era, they knew that they had to have the support of those large members and became increasingly dismissive and frankly rude about other members, and then shut off things like the forum and so on, and were openly rude about people who were very interested in Nominet but weren't part of that small group of power brokers. And so the current system has been gamed, is what I would say. And the very fact that Andrew raises the question that a candidate coming from that power base starts with a massive advantage really, frankly, begs the question as to the appropriateness of the voting system.
Thank you. This concludes our debates. We can carry on them with a glass of wine or beer. And of course, just a quick note, Volker maybe would be able to join live via Twitter or somehow, but me as the organizer, I personally do not like when you have physical appearances, then a person who is getting involved, that he is sitting from the comfort of his sofa and joins the community that has actually made an effort to come in. I don't know Volker myself, but this is an important debate here, and if I personally think that if a candidate really wants something, that if there is one chance to meet all the members, well, he knew about this event most probably, or had to knew, and then he had to use the chance. Yes, and then he could or couldn't use, so we don't know what it. And just in case if somebody asks why he's not here, then I made a decision that this will be in person. And of course, all this session was agreed on the very, very last moment. And thank you from both of you, Jim and Kieren.
Thank you for organising it.
Thank you. And yes.
I should say there's a Nominet sanctioned event coming up.
6th of September.
They proposed the 6th of September.
If you're a member, you can get a link in, and it's all online.
I don't think it's going to be as interactive. I asked what the rules were. I haven't been told they are yet. I think they